The sound of Derek's laughter echoed through his corner office as I stood frozen in the doorway, watching him lean back in his leather chair with that familiar smug expression plastered across his face. His phone was pressed to his ear, and I could hear every word of his conversation with his brother Mike through the glass walls of his downtown Chicago law firm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Trust me, she's not going anywhere, Derek said, spinning slightly in his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I've got her exactly where I want her. No job, no money of her own, completely dependent on me. Sarah knows she can't survive without me. Hell, I remind her of that every single day. My heart hammered against my chest as I clutched the manila envelope containing divorce papers that had taken me 2 years to secretly prepare. 2 years of careful planning, of hiding money, of rebuilding my confidence one small step at a time. 2 years of pretending to be the helpless, dependent wife he believed me to be, while I methodically constructed my escape plan. She threatened. To leave me last month after that little incident at the country club, Derek continued, completely oblivious to my presence. You should have seen her face when I told her she'd never make it on her own. Reminded her that nobody would hire a 34-year-old woman who hasn't worked in 8 years. She was crying within minutes, apologizing for even thinking about the incident at the country club. I remembered it perfectly. Derek had humiliated me in front of his colleagues and their wives, loudly criticizing my appearance and telling everyone how I couldn't even manage our household budget without his constant supervision. When I'd quietly suggested we discuss it privately later, he'd laughed and said I should be grateful he tolerates my incompetence. The best part is, Derek's voice grew more animated. She actually believes she needs my permission for everything. Buying groceries, visiting her sister, even what clothes to wear. I've trained her well, Mike. She's like a well-behaved pet at this point. I took a deep breath and stepped into his office, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Derek looked up, startled, quickly ending his call with a muttered excuse to his brother. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation as he noticed the envelope in my hands. Sarah, what are you doing here? I told you never to come to my office without calling first. His tone carried that familiar edge of control, the one that used to make me shrink back and apologize immediately. Instead, I walked calmly to his desk and placed the manila envelope directly in front of him. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been in years. These are divorce papers, Derek. I'm leaving you and I'm never coming back. The color drained from his face as he stared at the envelope like it was a venomous snake. What the hell is this? Some kind of joke? He picked up the papers with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the legal documents that would dissolve our 10-year marriage. It's not a joke, I said, standing straighter than I had in a decade. I filed for divorce 3 days ago. You've been served. Derek shot to his feet, his chair rolling back and hitting the window behind him. You can't be serious. You're nothing without me, Sarah. You have no job, no skills, no money. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? I smiled then. A genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after years of forced expressions. Actually, Derek, I have a job. I've been working remotely as a freelance graphic designer for the past year and a half. I have my own apartment across town, which I've been paying for with money I earned myself. And I have something you never thought I'd find again. What's that? He sneered, trying to regain his composure. My self-respect. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see his colleagues and assistants pretending not to watch our confrontation, though their eyes kept darting our way. Derek's face cycled through several emotions: disbelief, anger, desperation, and finally, panic. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. You're having some kind of breakdown. You can't just walk in here and throw our marriage away. Over nothing. Over nothing? I repeated, my voice gaining strength. Derek, you've spent the last 8 years systematically destroying my confidence, isolating me from my friends and family, and making me believe I was worthless. That's not nothing. That's abuse. He flinched at the word, glancing nervously at the glass walls surrounding us. Keep your voice down, he hissed. People can hear you. Good, I said, not lowering my voice at all. Let them hear. Let them know exactly what kind of man you really are. Derek moved around his desk, attempting to corner me the way he had countless times at home, but I stepped back, maintaining my distance. The physical space between us felt symbolic of the emotional distance I'd been building for months. Sarah, think about this rationally, he said, his tone shifting to the manipulative sweetness he used when he wanted something. We can work this out. I know I've been stressed with work lately. Maybe I've been a little hard on you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. A little hard on me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Derek, last week you screamed at me for 20 minutes because I bought the wrong brand of pasta. You made me return it to the store and apologize to you for wasting your money. You've convinced me that I couldn't do anything right, that I was stupid and helpless and lucky that you put up with me. His face darkened. Well, aren't you? Look at yourself, Sarah. You're a mess. You've gained weight, you dress like a frumpy housewife, and you can barely hold a conversation about anything more complex than grocery shopping. I've been carrying you for years. The old Sarah would have crumbled at those words. She would have believed them, internalized them, and spent the next week trying to prove her worth to him, but the new Sarah, the one who had been secretly rebuilding herself piece by piece, just smiled. You know what's funny, Derek? I used to believe that. I used to think I was lucky to have you, that no one else would want someone as pathetic as me. But then I started working again, started talking to other people, started remembering who I used to be before I met you. I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of my freelance portfolio website. I've completed 47 projects in the past 18 months. I have a 5-star rating and a waiting list of clients. I'm making more money than I ever did before we got married, and I love what I do. Derek's eyes widened as he looked at the screen. That's impossible. You don't have the skills for this kind of work. I taught myself, I said simply. Turns out, I'm not as stupid as you convinced me I was. I spent every moment you were at work learning new software, taking online courses, building my portfolio. While you thought I was sitting at home watching soap operas and eating bonbons, I was building a career. He snatched the phone from my hands, scrolling through the testimonials and project examples. His face grew redder with each positive review he read. This can't be real. You're making this up. Call any of those clients, I challenged. Ask them about their experience working with Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell? He looked confused. My maiden name. The name I'll be using again once this divorce is finalized. I never legally changed it when we got married, remember? You said it didn't matter because I'd just be Mrs. Derek Thompson anyway. The truth was, I had planned to change my name after our wedding, but Derek had been dismissive about the paperwork involved. He'd said it was a waste of time and money, that everyone would call me Mrs. Thompson regardless. At the time, I'd been hurt by his casual attitude. Now I realized it had been a gift. Derek slammed my phone down on his desk. None of this matters. You signed a prenup, Sarah. You get nothing. The house, the cars, the investments, all of it stays with me. You'll be living in some crappy studio apartment, eating ramen noodles, and wondering why you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. The prenup protects your assets from before our marriage, I said calmly. But it doesn't cover my income or assets that I've earned independently. My lawyer explained it to me very thoroughly. Your lawyer? His voice cracked slightly. Jennifer Chen. She's been representing me for the past 6 months. She's very good at her job, Derek. Almost as good as you think you are." The mention of another lawyer seemed to shake him more than anything else I'd said. Derek's entire identity was built around being the smartest person in the room, the one who controlled every situation. The idea that I had been planning this for months, that I had outsmarted him, was clearly devastating to his ego. "You can't afford a lawyer like Jennifer Chen," he said desperately. "She charges $500 an hour." "I can afford her just fine. Turns out graphic design pays well when you're actually good at it." I picked up my phone from his desk, noting how his hands were shaking now. "She's already filed all the necessary paperwork. The process server will be at the house later today to get your signature on a few additional documents." Derek's facade of control was crumbling before my eyes. The man who had terrorized me with his anger and manipulation for years, suddenly, looked small and pathetic. "Sarah, please, don't do this. I love you." "No, you don't," I said firmly. "You love having someone to control. You love having someone to belittle and manipulate so you can feel superior. But you don't love me. I'm not even sure you know who I really am." "That's not true. I know you better than anyone." "Really? What's my favorite book?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking confused. "What's my biggest fear? My happiest childhood memory? What do I want to do when I retire?" I waited, but he had no answers. "You don't know any of those things, Derek, because you never cared enough to ask. In 10 years of marriage, you never once asked me what I wanted or how I felt about anything that mattered." "I gave you everything," he said weakly. "A beautiful house, expensive clothes, a comfortable life." "You gave me a prison," I corrected. "A very pretty prison where I had to ask permission to buy tampons and apologize for breathing too loudly while you watched TV." Derek suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. His grip was tight enough to hurt, his eyes wild with desperation. "You're not leaving me, Sarah. I won't let you. You belong to me." For a split second, I felt the familiar fear rise in my chest. This was the Derek I knew best, the one who appeared when he felt his control slipping, the one who had pushed me down the stairs and then convinced me it was my fault for wearing slippery socks, the one who had hidden my car keys for a week and told everyone I was too irresponsible to drive. But then I remembered something Jennifer had told me during one of our planning sessions. "Fear is a choice, Sarah. He only has power over you if you give it to him." I looked down at his hand, gripping my wrist, then back up at his face. "Let go of me, Derek. No, we're going home right now, and we're going to forget this ever happened. If you don't let go of me in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to scream for help. And given that we're surrounded by glass walls and a law firm full of attorneys, I'm pretty sure someone will respond quickly." He glanced around nervously, realizing that several people were now openly staring at us. His grip loosened slightly, but he didn't release me. "1, I counted. "Sarah, stop this. 2. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You're embarrassing yourself. 3. Think about what you're doing. 4. He dropped my wrist like it was on fire, stepping back with his hands raised. "Fine. You want to make a scene? You want to humiliate me in front of my colleagues? This is exactly why our marriage is failing. You're selfish and dramatic." I rubbed my wrist where his fingers had left red marks. "Our marriage failed because you're an abusive control freak who sees me as property instead of a person." "I never hit you," he said defensively. "Physical abuse isn't the only kind of abuse, Derek. You isolated me from my friends and family. You controlled every aspect of my life. You made me believe I was worthless and stupid. You destroyed my self-esteem so thoroughly that I forgot I was ever a whole person before I met you." The truth of those words hit me as I spoke them. I had been a whole person once. I'd been Sarah Mitchell, the girl who graduated summa cum laude with a degree in graphic design. The woman who had her own apartment, her own friends, her own dreams. The person who laughed easily and spoke her mind and believed in herself. Derek had systematically dismantled that person, brick by brick, until only a shell remained. But somehow, that shell had managed to rebuild itself in secret, in the quiet moments when he wasn't watching. "I want you out of the house by the end of the week," I continued. "Jennifer is filing for a restraining order this afternoon. You'll be served with that tomorrow." "A restraining order?" Derek's voice rose to a near shout. "Are you insane? I've never done anything to warrant a restraining order." "Really? Then explain this." I pulled up my sleeve, revealing a fading bruise on my upper arm. "Or this." I showed him my wrist, where his fingerprints were still visible from moments before. His face went white. "Those are from... You fell down the stairs last week. I tried to catch you. I have photos, Derek. Dozens of them. Dating back 3 years. Every bruise, every mark, every time you accidentally hurt me. Jennifer says they'll be very helpful in court." The lie came easily. I didn't actually have dozens of photos. I'd only started documenting his abuse in the past 6 months, when Jennifer had explained how important evidence would be. But Derek's panicked expression told me he believed it. "You've been planning this for years," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "No," I said honestly. "I've been surviving for years. I only started planning my escape when I realized I deserved better than survival." Derek collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked broken, defeated. But then I remembered all the times he'd made me feel exactly the same way, and my sympathy evaporated. "How long?" he asked without looking up. "How long what?" "How long have you been lying to me? Pretending to be the helpless little wife while you plan to destroy our marriage?" "I've been working for 18 months, I said. "But I've been planning to leave for almost 3 years. Ever since the night you convinced me that my sister hated me and never wanted to see me again." Derek's head snapped up. "Lisa does hate you. She told me so herself." "No, she didn't. I called her last month. Turns out she's been trying to reach me for years, but you've been intercepting her calls and emails. She thought I was angry with her because I never responded to any of her attempts to contact me." The look of guilt that flashed across his face confirmed what I'd suspected. Derek had systematically cut me off from every support system I'd had, convincing me that my own family and friends had rejected me. It was perhaps the cruelest thing he'd done, and that was saying something. "We're having dinner tonight," I continued. "Lisa and her husband are driving down from Milwaukee. I'm going to meet my 2-year-old nephew for the first time since you convinced me that Lisa didn't want me around her children." Derek said nothing, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was probably calculating how much damage Lisa could do to his reputation if she shared what she knew about our marriage. "I should go," I said, heading toward the door. "I have a client call in an hour and I don't want to be late." "Wait," Derek called out desperately. "Sarah, please, don't do this. I can change. I'll do whatever you want. We can go to therapy, take a vacation, start over. Just give me another chance." I paused in the doorway, looking back at him one last time. He was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face. It was the first time I'd seen him cry in our entire relationship, and I realized that his tears weren't for me or for our marriage. They were for himself, for the loss of control, for the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. "I gave you chances for 10 years, Derek. Every time you belittled me, every time you made me feel small and worthless, every time you convinced me that I was lucky to have you. Those were all chances, and you wasted every single one of them." "But I love you," he sobbed. No, I said softly, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. You love the idea of owning me, but you never loved me enough to let me be myself. And I finally love myself too much to let you keep destroying who I am. I walked out of his office, through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms, past the receptionist who pretended not to notice that one of the firm's partners was having a complete meltdown behind glass walls. I didn't look back, didn't second-guess my decision, didn't feel even a moment of regret. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like a journey to freedom. With each floor that passed, I felt lighter, as if I was shedding years of accumulated pain and self-doubt. By the time I reached my car, I was practically floating. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. Her eyes were clear and bright, her shoulders were straight, and she was smiling. Really, genuinely smiling for the first time in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," I typed back. "He's been served. The restraining order can be filed whenever you're ready." "Excellent. See you tomorrow to go over the details. You did great, Sarah." I had done great. I'd walked into that office as Derek's victim and walked out as my own person. The transformation wasn't complete. I knew there would be difficult days ahead, legal battles to fight, emotional healing to do. But the hardest part was over. I'd taken the first step, spoken my truth, and reclaimed my power. As I drove out of the parking garage and into the bright Chicago sunshine, I thought about the conversation Derek had been having when I arrived. He'd told his brother that he had me exactly where he wanted me, that I would never leave because I couldn't survive without him. How wrong he'd been. I had survived, I was surviving, and I was going to thrive. Derek Thompson had spent 10 years trying to convince me that I was nothing without him. It had taken me 2 years of secret planning and 1 afternoon of courage to prove that he was nothing without someone to control. The woman who had entered that office building an hour earlier had been Sarah Thompson, Derek's wife, Derek's victim, Derek's possession. The woman driving away was Sarah Mitchell, freelance graphic designer, survivor, and for the first time in a decade, completely and utterly free. I had a client call to take, a sister to see, a new life to build. Derek could keep his corner office, his expensive suits, and his illusions of power. I had something much more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to save myself. The divorce papers were served. The cage was open, and I was finally ready to fly. I met Derek Thompson on a rainy Thursday evening in October, exactly 11 years ago. I was 23, fresh out of college with my graphic design degree, and a head full of dreams about starting my own creative agency someday. I'd been working at a small marketing firm in downtown Chicago for 6 months, learning the ropes and building my portfolio while living in a tiny studio apartment that I absolutely loved. The coffee shop where we met was my regular spot for working late into the evening. I'd claimed the corner table by the window, my laptop open beside sketches for a nonprofit's rebranding project. The rain was coming down hard enough that I could barely see the street through the steamed-up windows, and I was completely absorbed in my work when someone cleared their throat beside my table. "Excuse me, but would you mind if I sat here? Everywhere else is taken." I looked up to see a tall man in an expensive-looking suit, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain. He was handsome in that polished, professional way that screamed success and confidence. The coffee shop was indeed packed with people seeking shelter from the storm, and his request seemed reasonable enough. "Of course," I said, quickly moving. "My papers to make room." "Sorry, I didn't realize I was hogging the whole table." "Don't apologize," he said with a smile that made my stomach flutter unexpectedly. "I'm Derek, by the way, Derek Thompson." "Sarah Mitchell," I replied, shaking his offered hand and noticing how warm and firm his grip was. Derek ordered a black coffee and a sandwich, then settled into the chair across from me. I tried to refocus on my work, but I kept finding myself glancing up at him. He was reading what looked like legal documents, making notes in the margins with the expensive fountain pen. Everything about him seemed sophisticated and put together in a way that made my thrift store clothes and student loan debt feel suddenly inadequate. "What are you working on?" he asked, after catching me staring for the third time. I felt my cheeks heat up. "Oh, just a logo design for a local animal shelter. Nothing too exciting." "Mind if I take a look? I'm always curious about creative processes." I hesitated for a moment, then turned my laptop so he could see the screen. I'd been working on several different concepts, trying to capture both the warmth and professionalism the shelter wanted to convey. Derek studied the designs with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about my choices and nodding appreciatively at my explanations. "These are really impressive," he said finally. "You have a real talent for this." The compliment sent a warm glow through my chest. I wasn't used to such direct praise for my work, especially from someone who seemed so accomplished himself. "Thank you. What do you do?" I asked, though his attire and demeanor already suggested something in the professional sphere. "I'm a lawyer," he said, and I noticed he sat up a little straighter as he said it. "Corporate law, mostly. Mergers and acquisitions, contract negotiations, that sort of thing." I nodded, as if I knew what any of that meant beyond the basic concepts. Derek must have sensed my uncertainty because he smiled and added, "Basically, I help companies buy and sell each other without anyone getting sued." "That sounds important," I said, immediately feeling foolish for such a generic response. "It can be. But honestly, what you do seems much more fulfilling. Creating something beautiful that actually helps people and animals, that's making a real difference in the world." His words surprised me. Most people, especially successful professionals, tended to dismiss graphic design as frivolous or unimportant. But Derek seemed genuinely impressed by my work, and that validation felt intoxicating. We talked for another hour as the rain continued to pound against the windows. Derek was charming and attentive, asking detailed questions about my background, my education, my goals for the future. He listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. When I mentioned that I was originally from a small town in Wisconsin, he didn't make any condescending comments about my rural upbringing. When I talked about my dreams of eventually starting my own design firm, he nodded encouragingly instead of pointing out how competitive and difficult that would be. "I should probably let you get back to work," he said eventually, glancing at his expensive watch. "But I'd love to continue this conversation sometime. Would you maybe like to have dinner this weekend?" My heart skipped a beat. Men like Derek. Thompson didn't usually ask women like me to dinner. I was cute enough, I supposed, but I'd never considered myself the type to attract successful, sophisticated men. I was more accustomed to dating fellow art students or struggling musicians, creative types who understood my world but had little to offer in terms of stability or security. "I'd like that," I heard myself saying. Derek smiled that dazzling smile again and pulled out his phone. "Perfect. What's your number?" As we exchanged contact information, I felt like I was floating on air. This handsome, successful lawyer wanted to take me to dinner. He'd complimented my work, listened to my dreams, and made me feel special in a way I'd never experienced before. "I'll call you tomorrow to set up the details," Derek said as he gathered his papers and prepared to leave. The rain had finally stopped, and the coffee shop was beginning to empty out. "I'll look forward to it," I replied, probably grinning, like an idiot. Derek leaned down and kissed my cheek softly before heading toward the door. I watched him walk away, admiring his confident stride and the way other people seemed to notice him as he passed. I felt chosen, special, like I'd won some kind of lottery I hadn't even known I'd entered. That first dinner date was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. Derek took me to an upscale Italian restaurant in River North, the kind of place I'd walked past countless times but never imagined actually eating in. He ordered wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and insisted I try dishes I'd never heard of. Throughout the meal, he was the perfect gentleman, pulling out my chair, asking about my food, keeping the conversation flowing effortlessly. He told me about his childhood in Evanston, the son of a successful businessman and a socialite mother. He'd gone to Northwestern for undergrad and Harvard for law school, graduating near the top of his class. His law firm was one of the most prestigious in Chicago, and he was on track to make partner within the next few years. Everything about his life screamed success and stability. In contrast, I felt almost embarrassed to share details about my own background. My parents were both teachers in a small Wisconsin town. My dad taught high school math, and my mom was an elementary school librarian. They were wonderful, loving people who had sacrificed to send me to college, but their combined annual income was probably less than what Derek spent on his car payments. But Derek didn't seem to mind the disparity in our backgrounds. If anything, he seemed charmed by my stories about growing up in a town where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest excitement was the annual corn festival. He laughed at my anecdotes about small-town life and told me he found my perspective refreshing. Most of the women I meet through work are so focused on status and appearances, he said over dessert. It's nice to talk to someone who's real, who has actual substance. I practically glowed under his praise. Derek made me feel sophisticated and worldly, as if my small-town roots gave me some kind of authentic charm that his usual crowd lacked. For someone who had always felt like a bit of an outsider in the big city, his appreciation was incredibly seductive. Our second date was equally wonderful. Derek picked me up in his BMW and took me to a gallery opening in the Loop. I was nervous about fitting in with his crowd, but he introduced me to everyone as my friend Sarah, the talented graphic designer, and made sure I felt included in every conversation. When people asked about my work, Derek would jump in with enthusiastic descriptions of the projects I'd shown him, making my small-scale freelance work sound important and impressive. By our third date, I was completely smitten. Derek was unlike anyone I'd ever been with. He was cultured, successful, confident, and somehow incredibly interested in me. He remembered details from our conversations, brought me small gifts that showed he'd been thinking about me, and made me feel like the most special woman in Chicago. It was after our fifth date that Derek first kissed me properly. We were standing outside my apartment building, and I was fumbling with my keys while trying to work up the courage to invite him upstairs. Before I could say anything, he gently took my face in his hands and kissed me with a passion that made my knees weak. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he murmured against my lips. What took you so long? I whispered back, surprised by my own boldness. Derek smiled and kissed me again, deeper this time. When we finally broke apart, I was breathing hard and feeling dizzy with desire. Would you like to come up? I asked, my voice barely audible. Are you sure? Derek asked, his eyes searching my face. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Derek took my hand and followed me up to my tiny studio apartment. I was suddenly self-conscious about the cramped space, the secondhand furniture, the stack of art supplies in the corner. But Derek didn't seem to notice any of that. His attention was entirely focused on me. What followed was the most incredible night of my life up to that point. Derek was a generous and attentive lover, taking his time to explore every inch of my body and making sure I felt cherished and desired. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in my narrow bed, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. Stay the night, I whispered into the darkness. I was hoping you'd ask, Derek replied, pulling me closer. I woke up the next morning to find Derek already dressed and ready to leave. He kissed me goodbye and promised to call later, then disappeared into the elevator with a final wave. I spent the rest of the day floating on cloud nine, replaying every moment of the previous evening and already counting the hours until I'd see him again. Our relationship progressed quickly after that. Derek would call every day, sometimes multiple times, just to check in and see how I was doing. He'd send flowers to my office for no reason at all, surprising my coworkers and making me the envy of every woman in the building. On weekends, he'd take me to expensive restaurants, cultural events, and social gatherings where he'd proudly introduce me as his girlfriend. Within 3 months, I was spending most nights at Derek's upscale condo in Lincoln Park. His place was everything my studio apartment wasn't. Spacious, elegantly furnished, with a view of the lake and amenities I'd only seen in magazines. Derek had excellent taste in everything from wine to art to music, and I found myself absorbing his preferences like a sponge. "You don't have to pretend to like jazz just because I do," Derek said one evening when he caught me nodding along to a Miles Davis album I honestly didn't understand. "I'm not pretending," I protested, though we both knew I was lying. "I'm just learning to appreciate it." Derek smiled and pulled me onto his lap. "I love that about you, Sarah. You're so open to new experiences, so willing to grow and expand your horizons. Most people are set in their ways by our age." His words made me feel sophisticated and mature, as if my willingness to adopt his preferences was a sign of my intellectual flexibility rather than my desperate desire to please him. Looking back now, I can see how that pattern began so early in our relationship. Derek would express an opinion or preference, and I would automatically assume it was superior to my own. He liked expensive wine, so my preference for beer must be unsophisticated. He found romantic comedies vapid, so my enjoyment of them must be a sign of poor taste. He thought my friends from work were boring, so I must have been settling for subpar company. None of these adjustments felt forced or uncomfortable at the time. Derek never demanded that I change. He simply shared his perspectives with such confidence and authority that I naturally assumed he must be right. His world was so much more refined and successful than mine that it seemed logical to let him guide me toward better choices. The first real sign of trouble came about 6 months into our relationship. I had been invited to my college roommate Emma's wedding, and I was excited to introduce Derek to my closest friends and see everyone again. The wedding was in Madison, Wisconsin, just a few hours' drive from Chicago. "A weekend in Wisconsin?" Derek said when I brought up the invitation. "That sounds quaint." Something in his tone made me defensive. "Emma's my best friend. I have to go to her wedding." "Of course you do," Derek agreed quickly. "I just meant that it'll be different from what we're used to. Small-town wedding, probably. Not very sophisticated." "What's wrong with that?" I asked, feeling a flicker of annoyance. Derek held up his hands in surrender. "Nothing at all. I'm sure it'll be charming. I just want to make sure we fit in, that's all." The way he said "we" made my heart skip a beat. Derek wanted to come with me to Wisconsin, wanted to meet my friends and be part of my world. I pushed aside my irritation at his comments about sophistication and focused on how wonderful it would be to show him off to everyone. "You really want to come?" I asked. "Of course. I want to meet the people who are important to you." Emma's wedding was lovely in exactly the unpretentious way Derek had predicted. The ceremony took place in a small church where Emma's family had attended for generations, followed by a reception in the church's fellowship hall decorated with sunflowers and mason jars. The food was potluck style, with Emma's aunts and church ladies providing everything from fried chicken to homemade pies. The band was made up of local musicians who played a mix of country and classic rock. I loved every minute of it. The warmth and genuine affection of the celebration reminded me of everything I'd missed about home. But I could see Derek struggling to find his place in the festivities. He looked out of place in his expensive suit among the men in their Sunday best, and he seemed baffled by the casual, communal nature of the event. "This is so authentic," he kept saying, in a tone that made it sound like he was visiting a living museum rather than attending a friend's wedding. My college friends were excited to meet Derek, but I could sense their confusion about our relationship. We were such an obvious mismatch. the small-town girl with her big city lawyer boyfriend, that everyone seemed to be trying to figure out what we had in common. "He's very polished," Emma said when we managed to steal a few minutes alone in the church bathroom. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked, immediately defensive. "Not bad. Just different from what I expected for you. You seem a little tense around him." "I'm not tense. I just want everything to go well." Emma studied my face in the bathroom mirror. "Sarah, you don't have to perform for the right person. You can just be yourself." Her words stung because they hit too close to home. I had been performing all weekend, trying to manage Derek's comfort level while also fitting back into my old social circle. It was exhausting, like trying to translate between two different languages all evening. The drive back to Chicago was quiet. Derek seemed lost in thought, and I was afraid to ask what he was thinking. Finally, as we reached the city limits, he spoke up. "Your friends are nice," he said carefully. "But?" I prompted, hearing the unspoken criticism in his tone. "No, but they're perfectly nice people. I just realized how different our worlds are." "Different how?" Derek glanced over at me, then back at the road. "Sarah, you're so much more than where you come from. You have talent, intelligence, sophistication. You don't have to limit yourself to that small-town mentality." "What do you mean by small-town mentality?" "Just the lack of ambition, I suppose." "Your friend Emma seems content to teach elementary school in the same town where she grew up. That's fine for her, but you could do so much more with your life." His words made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite articulate why. Emma was happy with her life, happy with her job and her new husband, and their plans to buy a little house near her family. There was nothing wrong with contentment, was there? But Derek's perspective was seductive. He saw potential in me that even I hadn't recognized. He believed I could be more sophisticated, more successful, more worldly than I'd ever imagined. All I had to do was let him guide me toward becoming the best version of myself. "I don't want to lose touch with where I come from," I said finally. "Of course not," Derek agreed. "I'm not saying you should cut ties with your past. I'm just saying you don't have to be limited by it." That conversation marked a subtle shift in our relationship. Derek began making more suggestions about my career, my friendships, my lifestyle choices. He encouraged me to take on higher-profile clients, even when it meant working longer hours and having less time for my friends. He suggested I update my wardrobe to look more professional, offering to take me shopping and pay for clothes I could never afford on my own. He pointed out that my studio apartment wasn't really suitable for entertaining clients or professional contacts. Each suggestion made sense on its own. Derek was successful and sophisticated. His advice was probably valuable. And he was offering to help me improve my life, to reach my full potential. How could I argue with that? The changes came gradually. I started spending more time at Derek's condo and less time at my own apartment. I accepted his offers to buy me professional clothes, telling myself it was an investment in my career. I began declining invitations from my work friends when Derek had other plans for us. I stopped calling my sister Lisa as frequently because Derek and I were always busy with dinner parties, cultural events, or weekend trips. "You're becoming quite the sophisticated lady," Derek said one evening as we got ready for another work function. He'd bought me a black cocktail dress for the occasion, along with jewelry and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Do you think so?" I asked, smoothing the expensive fabric and admiring my reflection in his bedroom mirror. "Absolutely. You carry yourself differently now. More confidence, more presence. People notice you in a way they didn't before." His words sent a warm glow through my chest. I did feel different, more polished, more put together, more like the kind of woman who belonged at fancy law firm parties. The old Sarah in her thrift store clothes and secondhand jewelry felt like a distant memory. It was around our 1-year anniversary that Derek first brought up the subject of moving in together. We were having dinner at his favorite restaurant, and he'd just ordered a bottle of champagne to celebrate. "I've been thinking," he said as the waiter poured our drinks. "Your lease is up next month, right?" "Yes," I confirmed, wondering where this was going. "And you're spending most of your time at my place anyway." "True." Derek reached across the table and took my hand. "Move in with me, Sarah, officially. Let's take the next step." My heart raced with excitement. Derek wanted to live with me, wanted to make our relationship official in that permanent, adult way. It felt like validation of everything we'd built together over the past year. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's a big step." "I'm sure. I love you, Sarah. I love who you are and who you're becoming. I want to build a life with you." The word love hung in the air between us. We'd been dancing around it for months, both feeling it but neither quite brave enough to say it first. "I love you too," I whispered, tears of happiness blurring my vision. Derek squeezed my hand and smiled. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," I laughed, wiping my eyes. "Yes, absolutely yes." Moving in with Derek felt like the most natural thing in the world. I gave up my studio apartment and moved my belongings into his condo, though most of my furniture and decorations looked shabby and out of place in his elegant space. Derek suggested we store most of my things and gradually replace them with pieces that better suited the aesthetic we were creating together. "We want everything to feel cohesive," he explained as we boxed up my grandmother's quilt and my collection of vintage posters. "Your things are lovely, but they don't really fit the sophisticated look we're going for." I agreed, though I felt a small pang of sadness watching pieces of my personality disappear into storage boxes. But Derek was right. His condo was beautiful and elegant, and my eclectic college student decor would only detract from that. Besides, we were building something together now. It made sense to start fresh. Living with Derek was wonderful in many ways. I loved waking up next to him every morning, loved sharing meals and conversations and quiet evenings together. He was affectionate and attentive, always asking about my day and showing interest in my work. When clients frustrated me or projects weren't going well, Derek would listen patiently and offer advice that usually helped me see things more clearly. But there were adjustments, too. Derek had very specific preferences about how the condo should be maintained. He liked things clean and organized in a way that felt almost militaristic to someone who had always been more relaxed about housekeeping. He had particular ideas about what we should eat, when we should eat it, how the dishes should be arranged in the dishwasher. None of these preferences were unreasonable, but they were new to me. "I'm not trying to be controlling," Derek said, when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all the household rules. "I just function better when things are organized. It helps me focus on work when I know everything at home is running smoothly." That made sense. Derek worked long hours at a demanding job, and he was under a lot of pressure to perform at the highest level. The least I could do was help create a peaceful, orderly environment where he could relax and recharge. It was a small sacrifice for the incredible life we were building together. The first time Derek really lost his temper with me was about 6 months after I'd moved in. I had been working late on a project and lost track of time, forgetting that we had dinner reservations with some of his colleagues. By the time I looked up from my computer, we were already 20 minutes late. "Sarah, where are you?" Derek called from the bedroom where he was getting dressed. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I said, rushing to find something appropriate to wear. I completely lost track of time. Derek appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his suit, his face dark with anger. "We're supposed to be there in 10 minutes, Sarah. These people are important to my career." "I know. I'm sorry. Just give me 5 minutes to change." 5 minutes? You need to shower, do your hair, put on makeup. We're going to be an hour late. I could hear the frustration in his voice, and I felt terrible. This dinner was important to Derek, and I'd ruined it through my own carelessness. "Maybe you should go without me," I suggested. "Tell them I'm sick or something." Derek's expression grew even darker. "Show up alone to a couple's dinner? Do you have any idea how that would look? How unprofessional and embarrassing that would be?" "I'm sorry," I said again, feeling tears threaten. "I don't know what else to say." "You could say that you'll start taking our commitments seriously," Derek snapped. "You could say that you'll stop treating my career like it's some kind of joke." "I don't treat your career like a joke. I just made a mistake. A mistake that affects both of us. When you make me look unprofessional, it reflects on both of us, Sarah. I need a partner who understands that." The word partner hit me like a slap. Derek was right. We were partners now, and my actions affected him just as much as they affected me. I'd been selfish and thoughtless, putting my own work ahead of our shared commitments. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "I'm sorry, I'll do better." Derek's expression softened slightly. "I know you will. I just need you to understand how important these things are. We're building something together, and that requires both of us to be professional and reliable." I nodded, grateful that he wasn't angrier than he was. Derek had every right to be furious with me, but instead he was being patient and explanatory. He was helping me understand the standards I needed to meet if we were going to succeed as a couple. We ended up canceling the dinner entirely, with Derek calling to explain that I was feeling unwell. He was gracious about it, even apologetic for the short notice. But I could see the stress in his face as he made the excuses. I felt terrible, knowing that I'd put him in such an uncomfortable position. That incident marked another shift in our relationship, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Derek began taking a more active role in managing my schedule, helping me prioritize my commitments and avoid similar conflicts in the future. He suggested I set alarms to remind myself of important events, keep a shared calendar so he could help me stay on track, and generally be more mindful of how my choices affected our partnership. All of these suggestions made perfect sense. Derek was more organized and disciplined than I was, more accustomed to managing multiple priorities and professional obligations. It was natural that he would have insights that could help me improve. And I wanted to improve. I wanted to be the kind of partner Derek deserved, the kind of woman who enhanced his life rather than creating complications. Gradually, I found myself checking with Derek before making plans, running my schedule by him to make sure I wasn't creating conflicts or overlooking important commitments. He was always helpful and supportive, offering suggestions and adjustments that made everything run more smoothly. I began to rely on his organizational skills and professional judgment in ways that felt like natural extensions of our partnership. "You're getting so much better at this," Derek said one evening as we reviewed the upcoming week's schedule together. "Remember when you used to just wing it and hope for the best?" I laughed, though something in his tone made me slightly uncomfortable. I wasn't that bad, was I? "Not bad, just disorganized. But look at you now. You're like a completely different person, so much more sophisticated and put together." His words were meant as a compliment, but they left me feeling oddly hollow. Was I really so different from who I'd been before? And if so, was that necessarily a good thing? But I pushed those doubts aside. Derek loved me, wanted to build a life with me, saw potential in me that I'd never recognized myself. If becoming more organized and sophisticated meant becoming a better partner to him, then it was clearly the right path. The old Sarah had been charming enough in her way, but she'd also been scattered and unfocused, content with small achievements and limited ambitions. The new Sarah was someone Derek could be proud of, someone who fit into his world and enhanced his success. That had to be worth a few adjustments to my personality and preferences. After all, wasn't growth and self-improvement what love was supposed to inspire? As our second anniversary approached, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed since meeting Derek. I was more successful professionally, taking on bigger clients and more challenging projects. I looked more polished and sophisticated, with a wardrobe full of beautiful clothes and professional accessories. I moved through Derek's social and professional circles with increasing confidence, able to hold my own in conversations about topics I'd never considered before. On paper, everything was perfect. I was living with a successful, handsome man who loved me and wanted to help me reach my full potential. We had a beautiful home, an active social life, and bright prospects for the future. I should have been completely happy. So why did I sometimes feel like I was slowly disappearing? The first time Derek hit me, it wasn't really hitting. That's what I told myself afterward anyway. We'd been married for 3 years, and I'd been working from home for about 18 months at that point. Derek had convinced me that freelancing would give me more flexibility to support his career while still maintaining my own professional identity. It seemed like the perfect compromise. We were getting ready for his firm's annual holiday party, one of the most important social events of Derek's professional year. Partners and their spouses would all be there, along with major clients and potential business contacts. Derek had been preparing for weeks, coaching me on conversation topics and reminding me which people were most important to impress. I'd spent the afternoon at the salon getting my hair and makeup done professionally, something Derek insisted on for major events. The dress he'd chosen for me was hanging in our closet, a stunning navy blue number that had cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year. Everything was planned perfectly, down to the jewelry and shoes that complemented the overall look Derek had envisioned. But as I was getting dressed, I noticed something that made my heart sink. The zipper on the dress was stuck, caught on the delicate fabric in a way that seemed to have damaged it. No matter how carefully I tried to work it free, it wouldn't budge, and I could see a small tear beginning to form in the material. "Derek!" I called from the bedroom, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I need help with something." He appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie, looking absolutely perfect in his tailored tuxedo. "What's wrong?" "The zipper is stuck. I think the dress might be damaged." Derek's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and then cold anger. He walked over to examine the dress, his movements sharp and controlled. "How did this happen, Sarah?" "I don't know. The zipper just caught when I was trying to put it on." "You must have done something. These things don't just break on their own." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. "I was being careful, I swear. Maybe it was already damaged, or maybe you need to take better care of expensive things," Derek interrupted, his voice getting louder. "Do you have any idea how much this dress cost? How long it took me to find something appropriate for tonight?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. "Maybe I can wear something else? That black dress from..." "The black dress?" Derek's voice was incredulous. "Sarah, I specifically chose this dress for tonight. It sends the right message about us, about our taste and sophistication. The black dress makes you look like a funeral director." I stood there in my slip and stockings, feeling exposed and foolish while Derek continued to examine the damaged dress. His jaw was clenched in that way that meant he was trying to control his temper, but I could see the anger building behind his eyes. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I try to help you, to make sure you look appropriate and sophisticated, and you can't even put on a dress without destroying it." "Derek, please. I didn't mean to." "You never mean to, Sarah. That's the problem. You never mean to embarrass me, never mean to make things difficult, never mean to prove that you can't handle the simplest responsibilities." The words hit me like physical blows. Derek was right. I had been careless somehow, had damaged something beautiful and expensive that he'd chosen especially for me. I was always making mistakes like this, always falling short of the standards he tried to help me meet. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice breaking. "I'll figure something out. I'll make it work somehow." "How, Sarah? How are you going to make it work? We have to leave in 20 minutes, and you've destroyed the only appropriate outfit we have." Derek turned away from me, running his hands through his carefully styled hair. I could see the stress and frustration radiating from every line of his body, and I felt terrible knowing that I was the cause of it. "Maybe I should just stay home," I suggested quietly. "You could say I'm sick, and you could go without me." Derek spun around, his eyes blazing. "Stay home? From the most important party of the year? Do you want people to think our marriage is in trouble? Do you want them to wonder why my wife can't even show up to support my career?" "No, of course not. I just thought—" "You thought wrong. We are going to this party, Sarah, and you are going to smile and be charming and make me proud, because that's what partners do for each other." I nodded through my tears, trying to think of a solution. Maybe I could pin the dress closed, or use safety pins to hold it together. Maybe— Derek stepped closer to me, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone again. "You know what your problem is, Sarah? You don't think. You just act without considering the consequences, without thinking about how your actions affect other people." "That's not true," I protested weakly. "Isn't it? When was the last time you successfully managed something important without my help? When was the last time you made a decision that didn't require me to fix it afterward?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no examples came to mind. Derek was always having to help me with things, always having to guide me toward better choices. Maybe he was right about my inability to handle responsibility. "I try," I whispered. "Trying isn't enough anymore, Sarah. I need a wife who can handle the basic requirements of being married to someone like me. I need a partner who enhances my success instead of constantly creating problems." Derek's words were like ice water in my veins. He was questioning our entire marriage, questioning whether I was even capable of being the wife he needed. The thought of losing him, of losing this life we'd built together, was terrifying. "Please," I said, reaching for his hand. "I can do better. I will do better. Just give me another chance." Derek looked down at my outstretched hand, then back at my face. For a moment, his expression softened slightly. "I want to believe that, Sarah. I really do. But you keep making the same mistakes over and over again." "This won't happen again. I promise." Derek sighed deeply, as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Get the safety pins. We'll make it work somehow. But Sarah, this is the last time. I can't keep making excuses for you." I rushed to find safety pins, grateful that Derek was willing to help me salvage the situation. As he carefully pinned the dress closed, his hands were gentle, but his face remained cold and distant. I could feel the disappointment radiating from him, and it made my chest ache with shame. The party was a nightmare of forced smiles and careful movements to keep my dress from falling apart. Every time someone complimented my outfit, I felt like a fraud. Every time Derek introduced me to someone important, I wondered if they could see how inadequate I was, how I was just barely holding myself together with safety pins and determination. Derek was charming and professional throughout the evening, but I could sense his underlying tension. He stayed close to me, probably worried that I'd do something else to embarrass him. I barely spoke unless directly addressed, terrified of saying the wrong thing and making the situation worse. It was during the drive home that everything exploded. "Well, that was humiliating," Derek said as soon as we were alone in the car. "I thought it went okay," I said carefully. "No one seemed to notice anything wrong with the dress." "Oh, they noticed. Trust me, they noticed. Margaret Williamson asked me specifically if everything was all right with you because you seemed so nervous and quiet." My heart sank. Margaret Williamson was the wife of one of the firm's most important partners. If she'd noticed something was wrong, other people probably had too. "I was just trying to be careful not to make the dress situation worse," I explained. "The dress situation, Derek repeated sarcastically. That's what you're calling your complete inability to handle a simple task. Derek, please, I said I was sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Sarah. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I spent the entire evening worried about what you might do or say next. I felt tears starting again, but I tried to hold them back. Crying would only make Derek angrier, would only prove his point about my inability to handle stress and responsibility. I don't know what you want me to say, I whispered. Derek pulled into our garage and turned off the engine, then sat in, silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, Sarah. I want you to understand that when you mess up, it doesn't just affect you. It affects me, my career, our future together. I do understand that. Do you? Because your behavior suggests otherwise. Derek got out of the car and started walking toward the house. I hurried to follow him, my heels clicking on the concrete floor of the garage. As we entered the kitchen, Derek loosened his tie and turned to face me. Take off the dress, he said. What? The dress. Take it off. I want to see how bad the damage really is. I hesitated, feeling exposed and vulnerable under his intense stare. Derek, I'm tired. Can we just… Take off the dress, Sarah. Something in his tone made me comply immediately. I reached behind my back and began removing the safety pins, my fingers shaking slightly. Derek watched in silence as I carefully stepped out of the dress and handed it to him. He examined the damaged zipper and torn fabric, his face growing darker with each passing second. This is completely ruined, he said finally. $800, completely wasted. Maybe it can be repaired? Repaired? Derek's voice was rising again. Sarah, look at this. The fabric is torn, the zipper is broken. This dress is garbage now. I stood there in my slip and stockings, feeling smaller and more pathetic with each word he spoke. Derek was holding the dress up like evidence in a trial, proof of my incompetence and carelessness. $800, he repeated. Gone, because you can't even put on clothes without destroying them. I'll pay for it, I said desperately. I'll work extra hours and pay you back. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. Pay me. Back? With what? Your little freelance projects that barely cover your personal expenses? The dismissal in his voice was like a slap. My freelance work had been growing steadily, and I'd been proud of the clients I'd been attracting. But Derek was right. Compared to his salary, my income was practically nothing. I'll find a way, I insisted. You'll find a way, Derek mused, as if considering this. You know what, Sarah? Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time you started taking some real responsibility for your mistakes. He dropped the dress onto the kitchen counter and stepped closer to me. I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of alcohol from the party, could see the cold anger in his eyes. From now on, Derek said, his voice low and controlled. Every time you cost me money through your carelessness, you're going to pay it back. Every penny. Okay, I agreed quickly. That's fair. Is it? Because I'm not sure you understand what that means. $800, Sarah. That's about a month of your income, isn't it? I nodded, feeling the weight of the debt settling over me like a heavy blanket. And that's just for tonight, Derek continued. That doesn't count all the other times you've cost us money through your mistakes. The dinner you ruined by overcooking. The salmon when my boss came over. The wine glasses you broke at the Hendersons' party. The parking ticket you got because you couldn't be bothered to read the signs properly. Each item on his list felt like another weight added to my shoulders. I hadn't realized Derek was keeping track of all these incidents. Hadn't thought of them as debts I owed him. Maybe you should write them down, Derek suggested, as if he was being helpful. Keep a running total of what you owe me. It might help you be more careful in the future if you can see the real cost of your carelessness. Okay, I whispered, though the idea made me feel sick. Derek reached out and touched my face, his fingers gentle despite the harshness of his words. I'm not trying to be cruel, Sarah. I'm trying to help you understand that actions have consequences. You can't just float through life expecting other people to clean up your mistakes. I leaned into his touch, grateful for even this small show of affection after such a difficult evening. I know. I'll do better. I hope so, Derek said, but his tone suggested he had serious doubts. Because I can't keep carrying you like this. I need a partner, not a dependent. The word dependent stung, but I tried not to show it. Derek was right. I had become too reliant on him, too comfortable letting him handle the important decisions and responsibilities. Maybe this debt system would help me become more self-sufficient, more worthy of being his wife. Go to bed, Derek said, turning away from me. I need to think about some things. I wanted to ask what things. Wanted to know if he was considering ending our marriage, but I didn't dare. Instead, I gathered up my dress and shoes and headed toward the bedroom, leaving Derek alone in the kitchen with his thoughts and his disappointment. That night marked a turning point in our marriage, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Derek's debt system became a constant presence in our relationship, a running tally of my failures and inadequacies. Every broken dish, every missed appointment, every social mistake became another entry on a list that seemed to grow longer every week. I found myself becoming increasingly careful about everything I did, constantly aware that a single mistake could cost me weeks of income. But instead of making me more confident, this hypervigilance made me more anxious and error-prone. The more I worried about making mistakes, the more mistakes I seemed to make. Derek was patient with this system, almost businesslike in his tracking of my debts and payments. He never seemed angry about the money itself. We could certainly afford it, but he treated each incident as a valuable lesson in personal responsibility. He would sit with me at the end of each month, going over the list of my mistakes and calculating what I owed him. It's actually working, he told me after about 6 months of this arrangement. You're becoming much more aware of the consequences of your actions. I'm proud of the progress you're making. I should have felt good about his praise, but instead I felt hollow. I was walking on eggshells constantly, afraid to touch anything expensive or make any decisions without Derek's approval. I'd become so focused on avoiding mistakes that I'd stopped taking any initiative at all. My freelance work began to suffer as I became increasingly unwilling to take risks or try new approaches. I stuck to safe, simple projects that were unlikely to result in complications or client complaints. My income dropped accordingly, making it even harder to pay off my mounting debts to Derek. Maybe you should consider getting a regular job, Derek suggested one evening as we reviewed my latest payment. Something stable with benefits. Your freelance income is so unpredictable. The idea of giving up my design work entirely filled me with panic. It was the last remaining piece of my pre-Derek identity, the only thing that was still truly mine. But I could see his point. I was barely making enough money to cover my debts to him, let alone contribute to our household expenses. I could try to find better clients, I suggested weakly. Could you, though? Sarah, you've been struggling with this for months. Maybe it's time to admit that freelancing isn't working out. Derek's words were gentle, but they felt like a verdict on my entire professional identity. If I couldn't make it as a freelance designer, what did that say about my talent and abilities? Maybe I'd been kidding myself about my skills all along. What kind of job did you have in mind? I asked. Something administrative, maybe. Office work. Something that would give you structure and regular hours. The thought of sitting in a cubicle doing data entry or filing made me want to cry, but I nodded as if I was considering it seriously. Derek was trying to help me find stability and success. If he thought a regular job was the answer, he was probably right. It was around this time that Derek started making more direct criticisms of my appearance and behavior. He'd always offered gentle suggestions about my clothes and makeup, but now his feedback became more frequent and specific. "That color makes you look washed out," he'd say about a shirt I'd worn dozens of times before. "And those pants are getting a little tight, aren't they?" I'd look in the mirror and try to see what he was seeing, but I looked the same to myself. Maybe Derek's standards had risen as his career advanced. Maybe I needed to work harder to keep up with the image he needed to project. Derek started leaving articles on my nightstand, pieces about nutrition, exercise, professional wardrobe choices. He'd highlight relevant passages and leave little notes in the margins suggesting that I might find certain tips helpful. "I'm just trying to help you be the best version of yourself," he'd say when I questioned these materials. "You have so much potential, Sarah. I hate to see you settling for less than you could be." Gradually, I found myself spending more time and money trying to meet Derek's evolving standards. I joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, started following strict diets that Derek researched for me. I replaced most of my wardrobe with clothes that met his approval, taking on debt to pay for items that would help me look more professional and put together. The debt list grew longer and more complex. Now it wasn't just mistakes that cost me money, it was improvements Derek deemed necessary for my personal and professional development. The gym membership, the trainer, the wardrobe updates, the professional development courses he thought I should take. Everything was framed as an investment in my future, but I was the one paying for it all. I stopped calling my sister as frequently because our conversations had become strained. Lisa would ask about my work, my friends, my hobbies, and I'd realize I didn't have much to say about any of those things anymore. My life had become entirely centered around Derek and his needs, his schedule, his standards. "You sound different," Lisa said during one of our rare phone calls. "Tired, maybe. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, looking around Derek's immaculate condo that no longer felt like home. "Just busy with work and everything." "What kind of work? Last time we talked, you were doing that rebranding project for the nonprofit." I couldn't remember the last time I'd worked on anything creative or meaningful. Most of my recent projects had been simple, boring assignments that paid quickly and were unlikely to result in complications. "Just various things," I said vaguely. "How are Mom and Dad?" Lisa seemed to sense my reluctance to talk about myself because she shifted the conversation to family news. But after we hung up, I felt more isolated than ever. I was losing touch with everyone and everything that had once mattered to me, but I told myself it was temporary. Once I got better at meeting Derek's standards, once I proved myself worthy of being his wife, things would improve. The first time Derek actually hit me happened on a Tuesday evening in March. We'd been married for almost 4 years, and I'd been working part-time at a marketing firm for about 6 months. Derek had been right about needing more stable income. My freelance work had dwindled to almost nothing, and the regular paycheck helped me keep up with my debt payments. I was running late getting home from work because my boss had asked me to finish a project before leaving. I'd texted Derek to let him know, but I was still almost an hour behind our usual dinner schedule when I finally walked through the door. Derek was sitting at the kitchen island, still in his work clothes, with a glass of wine and a cold plate of food in front of him. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately, setting down my purse and hurrying to kiss his cheek. "Mr. Peterson needed me to finish those layouts before tomorrow's meeting, and I've been sitting here for 45 minutes, Derek said without looking at me. "I know. I texted you about being late. Did you not get it?" "I got it. That doesn't make it acceptable." I felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "Derek, I couldn't leave in the middle of an important project. You understand that, right?" Derek finally looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "What I understand is that you apparently think your little office job is more important than your responsibilities at home." "That's not true. It was just an emergency, a one-time thing." "Really? Because this is the 3rd time this month you've been late." I started to protest, but Derek was right. There had been other occasions when work had run over, when I'd been delayed by traffic or unexpected assignments. I'd always texted him to explain, but maybe I hadn't been considerate enough of his time and expectations. "You're right," I said, hanging up my coat. "I should have managed my time better. Let me heat up some dinner for both of us." "I already ate," Derek said. "The food got cold waiting for you." I felt a stab of guilt looking at the congealed meal on his plate. Derek had clearly made an effort to cook something nice for us, and I'd ruined it by being inconsiderate. "I'm really sorry," I said again. "Maybe I can make it up to you this weekend, cook something special." Derek stood up and carried his plate to the sink, his movements sharp and controlled. "Sarah, do you remember what we talked about when you took this job?" "That it would provide stability and regular hours," I recited. "And what did you promise me about managing your schedule?" "That I wouldn't let work interfere with our home life." "Right. And yet here we are, with you consistently prioritizing your boss's demands over your husband's needs." Derek's words made me feel small and selfish. He was right. I had been letting work take priority lately, getting caught up in projects and deadlines instead of remembering what was truly important. "It won't happen again," I promised. Derek turned around to face me, his expression unreadable. "Won't it? Because you've said that before, Sarah. You've made this same promise multiple times and yet you keep making the same mistake. This time is different. I'll talk to my boss about setting clearer boundaries." "Your boss?" Derek repeated. "You mean Mr. Peterson, who's been having you stay late more and more frequently?" There was something in Derek's tone that made me nervous. "He's just been busy with the quarterly reports. It's temporary." "Is it? Or is he taking advantage of you because he knows you won't say no?" I frowned, not sure what Derek was getting at. "He's not taking advantage of me. This is just how office jobs work sometimes." Derek stepped closer to me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "Sarah, you're being naive. Men like Peterson don't ask married women to stay late for innocent reasons." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe your boss is interested in more than just your professional skills." The suggestion was so ridiculous that I almost laughed. "Derek, Mr. Peterson is 60 years old and happily married. He has grandchildren. This is about work, nothing else." Derek's eyes narrowed. "You're defending him." "I'm not defending anyone. I'm just telling you the truth." "The truth according to who? According to the man who's been manipulating you into staying late with him?" "He's not manipulating me. Derek, you're being paranoid." The word paranoid hung in the air between us like a bomb. I saw Derek's face change, saw the anger that he usually kept so carefully controlled finally break through to the surface. "Paranoid?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I didn't mean... I'm paranoid for being concerned about my wife spending extra time alone with another man? I'm paranoid for noticing that you're consistently putting his needs ahead of mine?" "Derek, please, you're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I? Or are you so naive that you can't see what's really happening?" Derek moved even closer, backing me against the kitchen counter. I could see the pulse beating in his neck, could smell the wine on his breath. "I know what's happening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm working late because my boss asked me to. There's nothing inappropriate about it." "Nothing inappropriate about a married woman spending hours alone with a man who's clearly interested in her?" "He's not interested in me like that. You're imagining things." The slap came so quickly that I didn't see it coming. One moment Derek was standing in front of me, his face red with anger, and the next moment my cheek was stinging and my head was snapped to the side. I stood there in shock, my hand moving automatically to touch my burning cheek. Derek had never hit me before, had never even come close to physical violence. This couldn't be happening. "Don't you ever call me paranoid again," Derek said, his voice deadly calm. And don't you ever defend another man to me." I stared at him, unable to process what had just happened. The Derek I knew was controlled, sophisticated, never violent. This man standing in front of me was a stranger. "Derek," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You made me do that," he said, running his hands through his hair. "You pushed and pushed until I snapped. Do you see what happens when you're disrespectful?" I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that nothing I'd said justified hitting me, but I was too shocked to form coherent thoughts. My cheek was throbbing, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue. "I'm sorry," Derek said, his voice softening slightly. "I didn't want to do that, Sarah. But you need to understand that I won't tolerate disrespect in my own home." He reached out to touch my face, and I flinched involuntarily. Derek's expression darkened again. "Don't act like I'm some kind of monster," he said. "You know I'm not a violent person. You pushed me to this." I nodded numbly, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Derek pulled me into his arms, holding me against his chest while I stood there stiffly. "I love you, Sarah," he murmured into my hair. "I just need you to respect me, to respect our marriage. Can you do that?" "Yes," I whispered, because it seemed like the only safe answer. "Good. Now, about this job situation. I think it's time you quit." "Quit?" I pulled back to look at him. "Derek, I need this job. I need the income to pay you back for what? For debts that exist because you're careless and irresponsible? Sarah, maybe if you focused on being a better wife instead of playing office worker, you wouldn't make so many expensive mistakes." The logic was circular and confusing, but I was too shaken to think clearly. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe I was spreading myself too thin, trying to balance work and home responsibilities in a way that wasn't sustainable. "Think about it," Derek said, stroking my hair. "Wouldn't it be better if you could focus entirely on our home, our relationship? You could go back to freelancing, work your own hours, be available when I need you." The idea of quitting my job terrified me. It was my only source of regular income, my only connection to the outside world, my only remaining piece of independence. But Derek was my husband, and he was asking me to choose between my job and our marriage. "I'll think about it," I said. Finally. "Good." Derek smiled and kissed the top of my head. "I knew you'd see reason. You always do, eventually." As Derek went to shower, I stood alone in the kitchen, holding my still-burning cheek and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My husband had hit me, blamed me for it, and then convinced me to consider quitting my job. None of it made sense, but somehow Derek had made it all sound logical and necessary. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, seeing the red mark on my cheek and the confusion in my eyes. The woman staring back at me looked lost and frightened, nothing like the confident person I'd once been. But Derek was right about one thing. I had been disrespectful, had called him paranoid when he was just expressing concern about our marriage. Maybe if I tried harder to be the wife he needed, if I focused more on our relationship and less on outside distractions, we could get back to the happiness we'd once shared. I just needed to be better, to try harder, to prove that I was worthy of his love and patience. Because the alternative, losing Derek, losing this life we'd built together, was unthinkable, even if that life was slowly killing the person I used to be. I quit my job the following week. Derek was there when I called my boss to give my notice, standing behind me with his hands on my shoulders as I stumbled through an explanation about wanting to focus more on my freelance work. Mr. Peterson sounded disappointed but understanding, and I felt like I was severing my last connection to the outside world as I hung up the phone. "I'm proud of you," Derek said, kissing the top of my head. "This is going to be so much better for both of us. You'll see." For the first few weeks, I tried to convince myself he was right. I set up a small office space in our guest bedroom, and reached out to old clients, hoping to rebuild my freelance portfolio. Derek was supportive and encouraging, bringing me coffee while I worked and asking about my projects over dinner. But something fundamental had shifted in our relationship since that night in the kitchen. Derek's touch, which had once made me feel loved and desired, now made me tense. I found myself watching his face constantly, trying to gauge his mood and anticipate his reactions. The easy intimacy we'd once shared had been replaced by a careful choreography of appeasement and avoidance. Derek seemed to sense my new wariness, and it irritated him. "You're acting strange," he told me one evening when I flinched away from his attempt to massage my shoulders. "Distant, cold." "I'm not being cold," I protested, though I knew he was right. "I'm just tired." "Tired from what? Sitting at home? All day working on your little projects?" The dismissive way he said "little projects" stung. These were the same clients Derek had once praised me for attracting, the same work he'd encouraged me to pursue. But now that I was financially dependent on him again, my professional efforts seemed to matter less. "I'm building my business back up," I said carefully. "It takes time." Derek studied my face with that analytical expression he used when cross-examining witnesses. "You know what I think? I think you're still upset about that night when you disrespected me. You're holding a grudge." "I'm not holding a grudge." "Then prove it. Come here." It wasn't a request. Derek patted his lap, indicating that I should sit on his knee like a child seeking comfort. The gesture felt infantilizing and demeaning, but I complied rather than risk another confrontation. Derek wrapped his arms around me, holding me in place when I tried to maintain some distance. "See? This is nice, isn't it? Just you and me, no distractions, no outside interference." I nodded and tried to relax into his embrace, but every muscle in my body remained tense. Derek's hands roamed over my back and sides in a way that once would have been comforting, but now felt possessive and controlling. "I've been thinking about our future," Derek said, his voice taking on that planning tone he used when discussing important decisions. "About what we want our life to look like." "Okay," I said, wondering where this was leading. "I think it's time we started talking seriously about having children." The statement hit me like a physical blow. We'd discussed children in abstract terms early in our relationship, both agreeing that we wanted a family someday, but that someday had always felt distant and theoretical, something we'd consider once we were more established and settled. "Children?" I repeated, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Yes, I'm 36, Sarah. I'm ready to be a father, and you're not getting any younger either." The casual cruelty of that last comment made me wince. At 31, I was hardly ancient, but Derek had a way of making me feel like I was constantly racing against some invisible clock. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said honestly. "Financially, I mean. I'm just getting my business back on track and—" "Financially?" Derek laughed. "Sarah, I make more than enough money to support a family. Your little design projects are hardly necessary for our survival." "But I want to work. I want to have my own career." Derek's arms tightened around me slightly. "Why? What's more important than being a mother? What could possibly be more fulfilling than raising our children?" I struggled to articulate feelings I barely understood myself. The idea of having Derek's children right now, while I felt so lost and diminished, terrified me in ways I couldn't explain. I needed to find myself again before I could be responsible for another human being. "I just think we should wait a little longer," I said finally. "Make sure we're really ready." Derek was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel his mood shifting like a barometric pressure change before a storm. "Ready for what exactly?" "Sarah, we've been married for 4 years. We have a beautiful home, financial stability, everything we need to raise a family. What more are you waiting for?" I just want to feel more settled in my work first. Your work, Derek repeated flatly. You mean the same work that was causing problems in our marriage? The same work that was making you disrespectful and unreliable? That's not fair. You know my work is important to me. Derek suddenly shifted, dumping me off his lap and standing up. Important to you? More important than our marriage? More important than starting a family? No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Sarah? Because it sounds like you're saying you'd rather play at being a graphic designer than fulfill your role as my wife. The word role made something twist uncomfortably in my stomach. When had being Derek's wife become a role to be performed rather than a relationship to be lived? I want both, I said desperately. I want to be your wife and have a career. Lots of women manage both. Derek's expression grew cold and distant. Lots of women aren't married to men like me. Lots of women don't have the opportunities you have. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position? To have a husband who can provide for them completely, who wants to give them beautiful children and a perfect life. I felt the familiar guilt creeping in, the sense that I was being ungrateful and unreasonable. Derek was offering me security, stability, a chance to have the family I'd always thought I wanted. Why was I being so resistant? I know I'm lucky, I said quietly. Then act like it. Stop treating motherhood like it's some kind of punishment or sacrifice. You should be excited about this, Sarah. You should be grateful that I want to have children with you. Derek was right, I told myself. I should be excited about the prospect of starting a family with the man I loved. The fact that the idea filled me with dread rather than joy was probably just anxiety about the responsibility involved. Once I adjusted to the idea, once I stopped being so selfish and career-focused, I'd probably be thrilled. You're right, I said, forcing a smile. I'm sorry for being negative about it. It's just a big step. Derek's demeanor immediately softened. Of course it's a big step. That's why I want us to be on the same page about it. I love you, Sarah, and I want to build a family with you. But I need to know that you're committed to this, to us. I am committed. Good. Then we can start trying right away. The finality in his voice made it clear that this wasn't really a discussion. Derek had made a decision about our future, and my role was to agree and comply. The realization left me feeling hollow and trapped, but I nodded as if I was genuinely excited about the prospect. That night, as Derek made love to me with a purposefulness that had nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with procreation, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I'd felt like an active participant in my own life, rather than a passive recipient of Derek's plans and desires. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of doctor's appointments, fertility tracking, and mounting pressure. When I didn't get pregnant immediately, Derek became increasingly focused on optimizing every aspect of the process. He researched supplements, dietary changes, exercise routines, and stress reduction techniques, approaching conception with the same methodical intensity he brought to his legal cases. Your stress levels are probably too high, he informed me after I'd been taking pregnancy tests for 6 months with no success. Stress can definitely interfere with fertility. I'm not that stressed, I protested, though it was a lie. I was constantly on edge, walking on eggshells around Derek and jumping at every unexpected sound or expression. Sarah, you're obviously stressed. Look at yourself. You're anxious all the time. You're not sleeping well. You're barely eating. This isn't healthy for conception. Derek was right about my physical state, though he seemed oblivious to his own role in causing my stress and anxiety. I'd lost weight because his constant criticism of my appearance had made me afraid to eat normally. I wasn't sleeping because I was afraid of doing something wrong, even in my sleep. But pointing out these connections would only result in another lecture about my attitude and perspective. Maybe I should see a therapist, I suggested tentatively, to help with the stress. Derek's reaction was immediate and negative. A therapist? Sarah, you don't need a therapist. You need to relax and stop overthinking everything. But if stress is affecting my fertility, the stress is coming from your refusal to accept our life as it is. You're constantly worrying about things that don't matter, constantly questioning decisions that have already been made. That's what's causing your anxiety. Derek moved closer to me, taking my hands in his in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but felt more like restraint. Listen to me, Sarah. We have a beautiful life together. You have everything any woman could want. The problem isn't our situation. The problem is your perspective. You need to learn to appreciate what you have instead of constantly wanting something different. I do appreciate what we have. Do you? Because your behavior suggests otherwise. Happy women don't need therapists, Sarah. Happy women don't spend their time questioning their husband's decisions and wishing their lives were different. The logic was circular and impossible to argue with. If I was unhappy, it was because I was choosing to be unhappy. If I needed help, it was because I was refusing to accept the help Derek was already providing. Any problem in our relationship was automatically my fault for having the wrong attitude or unrealistic expectations. You're right, I said, because it was easier than continuing to argue. I'll try to be more positive. That's my girl. Derek smiled and kissed my forehead. I know you can do this. You just need to trust me to know what's best for us. It was around this time that I began to notice how isolated I'd become. Derek's concerns about my stress levels had led to further restrictions on my activities and relationships. He discouraged me from taking on new clients, worried that work pressure might interfere with conception. He suggested I limit my contact with my family, pointing out that my sister's questions about our plans for children only added to my anxiety. Lisa means well, Derek said after a particularly tense phone conversation where my sister had asked why I sounded so different lately. But she doesn't understand our situation. She's never been married to someone like me, never had the opportunities you have. Her perspective isn't helpful right now. I wanted to argue that Lisa's perspective might be exactly what I needed, but Derek's reasoning made a certain amount of sense. Lisa was single, focused on her own career, and had always been somewhat skeptical of my relationship with Derek. Maybe her influence was contributing to my negative attitude. She's my sister, I said weakly. Of course she is, and she'll always be your sister. I'm just suggesting that maybe right now, while we're trying to start our family, you should focus on the relationships that support our goals, rather than the ones that create doubt and confusion. The phrase, relationships that support our goals, stuck with me. It was such a calculating way to think about family and friendship, reducing human connections to their utility in Derek's grand plan for our life. But I was too exhausted to fight anymore, too worn down by months of circular arguments and careful navigation of Derek's moods. I stopped calling Lisa regularly, stopped returning her calls promptly, stopped sharing details about my life and marriage. When she asked direct questions about my happiness or Derek's treatment of me, I deflected with vague reassurances and subject changes. Gradually, our conversations became less frequent and more superficial, focused on safe topics like weather and work rather than anything meaningful or personal. The same pattern repeated with my few remaining friends. Derek always had reasonable-sounding concerns about their influence on my mental state or their understanding of our situation. One by one, I let these relationships fade rather than deal with the constant tension of defending them to Derek or managing his disapproval. My world shrank until it consisted almost entirely of Derek, his needs, his schedule, his plans for our future. I told myself this was temporary, that once I got pregnant and our family started growing, I'd have new connections and purposes that would fill the emptiness I felt. But the months passed without conception, and my isolation only deepened. It was during this period that I first encountered Dr. Rachel Martinez. I'd been having irregular periods, which Derek was convinced was related to my stress levels and negative attitude. When over-the-counter remedies didn't help, he finally agreed that I should see a gynecologist. Dr. Martinez was probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a direct manner that reminded me of my sister. During our first appointment, she asked routine questions about my medical history, my lifestyle, and my relationship. "Any history of domestic violence?" she asked, her eyes on my chart rather than my face. The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered quickly. "Nothing like that." Dr. Martinez looked up at me then, her gaze thoughtful and assessing. "Any emotional or psychological abuse? Financial control? Isolation from family and friends?" I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "My husband is very successful and protective. He just wants what's best for me." "I'm sure he does," Dr. Martinez said neutrally. "But sometimes what partners think is best doesn't align with what's actually healthy for us." Her words stayed with me long after the appointment ended. Derek had indeed been protective, had wanted what he thought was best for me. But when had his protection started feeling like imprisonment? When had his guidance started feeling like control? I tried to push these thoughts away, focusing instead on Dr. Martinez's medical findings. She'd discovered some hormonal imbalances that might be affecting my fertility, but nothing that couldn't be treated with medication and lifestyle changes. "The good news is that there's no reason you can't conceive," she told me during a follow-up visit. "But I want to address the underlying health issues first. Your cortisol levels are extremely elevated, which suggests chronic stress. Your vitamin D is low, probably from not spending enough time outdoors. And your weight loss over the past year is concerning." Derek had been pleased about my weight loss, frequently commenting on how much better I looked than when we first met. But Dr. Martinez seemed worried about it. "Have you been dieting?" she asked. "Not really. I just haven't had much appetite lately." Stress can definitely affect appetite. Are there things in your life that are causing you ongoing anxiety? I wanted to tell her everything, about Derek's debt system, about his constant criticism, about the way I'd gradually lost touch with everyone and everything that had once mattered to me. But the words stuck in my throat. Derek wasn't a monster. He was my husband, and he loved me. The problems in our marriage were largely my own fault for being ungrateful and resistant to his guidance. Just the normal stress of trying to get pregnant, I said finally. Dr. Martinez nodded, but something in her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe me. "Sarah, I want you to know that my office is a safe space. If there's anything you need to talk about, anything at all, I'm here to listen without judgment." Her offer was tempting, but I shook my head. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Really." As I left her office that day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the lobby's mirrors. The woman looking back at me was thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a permanent tension around her mouth. I barely recognized her as the confident, vibrant person I'd once been. But recognition was starting to dawn, slowly and painfully. The woman in the mirror wasn't just tired or stressed, she was disappearing. Day by day, choice by choice, Derek had been systematically erasing the person I used to be, replacing her with someone who existed solely to serve his needs and validate his decisions. The realization should have been empowering, should have motivated me to make changes and reclaim my life. Instead, it filled me with despair. I'd let this happen. I'd participated in my own diminishment, had chosen Derek's approval over my own well-being so many times that I'd forgotten what my own well-being even looked like. How could I undo years of gradual erosion? How could I become Sarah Mitchell again when I could barely remember who she had been? And even if I could remember, even if I could find the strength to fight back, how could I possibly escape from a life so completely controlled by someone else? The answer came to me slowly, over the course of several more months. It started with small acts of rebellion, keeping a journal that I hid from Derek, taking walks around the neighborhood when he was at work, secretly researching things online that had nothing to do with fertility or pregnancy. These tiny moments of independence felt revolutionary after so many years of asking permission for everything. I began to pay attention to Derek's patterns, to study the way he controlled and manipulated conversations. I started recognizing the techniques he used to make me doubt my own perceptions and memories. The more I observed, the clearer it became that our relationship wasn't just troubled, it was abusive. The word felt strange and foreign applied to my own situation. Derek didn't beat me regularly, didn't lock me in rooms or threaten me with weapons, but the emotional and psychological control he exerted was just as damaging as physical violence. He'd systematically isolated me, undermined my confidence, and made me financially dependent on him. He'd convinced me that my own thoughts and feelings were unreliable, that his perspective was the only valid one. Understanding the dynamics of our relationship was both liberating and terrifying. Liberation came from finally having words for what I'd been experiencing, from recognizing that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful or fundamentally flawed. Terror came from realizing how completely trapped I'd become and how difficult it would be to escape. But escape was exactly what I needed to do. The woman I'd been before Derek was still in there somewhere, buried under years of careful conditioning and systematic erasure. I needed to find her again, to remember what it felt like to make my own choices and trust my own judgment. The first step was admitting to myself that I wanted out, not out of marriage in general, but out of this marriage specifically. I didn't want to be Derek's wife anymore. Didn't want to live in his beautiful condo, following his careful rules and fulfilling his specific expectations. I wanted to be Sarah Mitchell again, to rediscover what I liked and disliked, what I wanted and needed, what made me happy versus what made Derek happy. The second step was accepting that Derek would never willingly let me go. He'd invested too much time and energy in shaping me into his ideal wife to simply accept my desire for independence. He would fight any attempt I made to leave, would use every tool at his disposal to keep me under his control. If I wanted freedom, I would have to take it. The third step was the hardest. I had to start planning my escape in secret, building resources and connections without Derek's knowledge. It would require deception on a scale I'd never attempted before, lying to someone who monitored my every move and questioned my every decision. But as I looked in the mirror that evening after my appointment with Dr. Martinez, studying the face of a woman I barely recognized, I knew I had no choice. The alternative was to continue disappearing until there was nothing left of Sarah Mitchell at all. I couldn't let that happen. Somewhere deep inside me, the person I used to be was fighting to survive. It was time to help her win. The plan took 18 months to execute. 18 months of careful deception, of rebuilding myself piece by piece while pretending to be the obedient wife Derek expected. It was the most difficult and dangerous thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most important. It started with Dr. Martinez, who became my unlikely ally in those first crucial weeks of awakening. During a routine follow-up appointment, she asked again about my stress levels and living situation. This time, something in her tone made me look up from the medical forms I was filling out. "Dr. Martinez," I said quietly, "what would you say to someone who thought they might be in an abusive relationship but wasn't sure?" She set down her pen and gave me her full attention. "I'd say that the fact they're asking the question suggests they already know the answer. And I'd tell them that recognizing abuse is the first step toward freedom." That conversation changed everything. Dr. Martinez gave me resources, phone numbers, websites to look at when Derek wasn't monitoring my internet usage. She helped me understand that what I was experiencing had a name, that it followed predictable patterns, and most importantly, that it wasn't my fault. Emotional abuse is designed to make you question your own reality, she explained during one of our sessions. Your husband has systematically undermined your confidence and independence to maintain control. That's not love, Sarah. That's possession. Hearing someone else validate my experiences was like being given permission to trust my own perceptions again. For years, Derek had convinced me that my feelings were wrong, my memories unreliable, my instincts flawed. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my feelings were actually quite accurate. The second crucial step was reconnecting with my sister, Lisa. I'd been avoiding her calls for so long that she'd started leaving increasingly worried voicemails. One afternoon, while Derek was in depositions all day, I finally called her back. Sarah, oh my God, I've been so worried. You haven't returned my calls in months. I know. I'm sorry. Things have been complicated. There was a long pause before Lisa spoke again, her voice careful but direct. Sarah, are you okay? And I mean really okay, not the fake okay you've been giving me for the past few years. The concern in her voice broke something open inside me. Before I could stop myself, I was crying into the phone, telling her everything. About Derek's control, about the debt system, about how isolated I'd become, about the night he hit me and convinced me it was my fault. Lisa listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her voice was fierce with protective anger. Sarah, you need to get out of there. Today. Right now. Pack a bag and come stay with me. I can't. It's not that simple. Derek will find me, and he'll make my life hell. He has connections everywhere, Lisa. He could destroy me professionally, financially. Then we'll figure it out together. But you can't stay there. What you're describing isn't marriage. It's imprisonment. Lisa became my lifeline over the following months. We developed a system of coded communications, ways to talk without Derek catching on. She helped me research lawyers, domestic violence, resources, and practical steps for leaving an abusive relationship safely. The third piece of my escape plan was financial independence. Derek monitored our joint accounts carefully, but he'd become complacent about my small freelance earnings. I started taking on more projects, lying about the pay rates and hiding portions of my income in a secret account I'd opened using my maiden name and Dr. Martinez's office as a mailing address. It was slow going. Derek still expected detailed reports on my work and income, still insisted on managing our finances completely. But by claiming some projects paid less than they actually did, by taking cash payments when possible, by selling some of my old possessions online without his knowledge, I gradually accumulated enough money to survive on my own for a few months. The fourth component was building a support network Derek didn't know about. Through Dr. Martinez, I connected with a domestic violence counselor named Patricia, who helped me understand the psychology of abuse and develop safety strategies. Through Lisa, I re-established contact with a few old friends who Derek had convinced me were negative influences. Each conversation was a risk. Derek monitored my phone and computer usage, often asking detailed questions about my activities when he came home from work. I had to become an expert at covering my tracks, deleting browser histories, using Lisa's phone to make important calls, meeting with Patricia during times when Derek thought I was grocery shopping or running errands. The person I became during those 18 months was someone I barely recognized. On the surface, I remained the compliant wife Derek expected, agreeing to his plans, following his schedules, accepting his criticisms without argument. But underneath, I was rebuilding Sarah Mitchell piece by piece, remembering who I'd been. Before Derek reshaped me into his ideal companion, I started small, reading books Derek wouldn't approve of, listening to music I actually enjoyed instead of the jazz he preferred, taking different routes when running errands just to prove to myself that I could make independent choices, buying coffee from shops he'd never been to, having brief conversations with strangers, remembering what it felt like to exist in the world as my own person rather than as Derek's wife. The psychological work was perhaps the hardest part. Years of Derek's conditioning had left me second-guessing every thought and feeling. Patricia helped me understand that this self-doubt was a deliberate result of psychological manipulation, not evidence of my own inadequacy. Abusers are experts at making their victims feel crazy, she explained during one of our clandestine meetings. They create chaos and then blame you for not handling it well. They change the rules constantly so you can never succeed. They rewrite history to make you doubt your own memories. It's all designed to keep you dependent and confused. Understanding. These tactics helped me recognize them when Derek used them. I started keeping a secret journal, documenting his behavior patterns and my emotional responses. Reading back through my entries, I could see the manipulation clearly laid out on paper in ways that were harder to dismiss or rationalize. Derek, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to my internal transformation. He was focused on his own career advancement and our continuing failure to conceive. My outward compliance satisfied him, and he didn't look deeper to see the growing strength and determination beneath the surface. There were close calls. Once, Derek found my hidden journal and demanded to know what I was writing about. I'd anticipated this possibility and created a decoy journal filled with innocuous thoughts about daily activities and fertility struggles. He read through it with growing boredom before tossing it back to me with a dismissive comment about my need for drama. Another time, he noticed that our phone bill showed calls to numbers he didn't recognize. I'd prepared for this too, claiming they were potential clients or doctors' offices related to my fertility treatments. Derek's assumption that my world revolved entirely around him and his needs made him surprisingly easy to deceive. The final phase of my plan began 6 months before I served him with divorce papers. I'd found an apartment across town, saved enough money for several months of expenses, and established relationships with the key professionals I'd need to support my independence. Jennifer Chen, the divorce attorney Lisa had recommended, helped me understand my legal options and prepare the necessary paperwork. "Your husband is going to fight this," Jennifer warned me during our initial consultation. "Men like him don't give up control easily. He'll try to make the process as difficult and expensive as possible, hoping to wear you down until you give up and come back." "I won't go back," I said, and meant it completely. "Good. But be prepared for him to use every weapon at his disposal. He'll try to turn your friends and family against you, try to destroy your reputation, try to make you financially desperate. We need to be ready for all of it." Jennifer helped me document Derek's abuse, gather evidence of his controlling behavior, and prepare for the various strategies he might use to maintain power over me. She also connected me with other resources: a therapist who specialized in abuse recovery, a financial advisor who could help me rebuild my credit and establish independence, even a self-defense instructor who taught me basic techniques for protecting myself. The night before I planned to serve Derek with papers, I lay awake beside him listening to his peaceful breathing and marveling at how completely I'd hidden my true intentions. For 18 months, I'd been planning his exit from my life while he slept peacefully next to me, confident in his control and my compliance. I thought about the woman I'd been when we first met, full of dreams and confidence and naive trust in other people's good intentions. Derek had systematically destroyed that woman, convinced her she was worthless and incompetent, trapped her in a beautiful cage of his own design. But somewhere in the depths of my being, she'd survived. She'd been waiting for this moment, for the chance to break free and reclaim her life. The next morning, I waited until Derek left for work before putting the final phase of my plan into motion. I'd already moved most of my important possessions to the new apartment over the course of several weeks, taking only small items Derek wouldn't notice were missing. This morning, I packed the last of my things, left my keys and wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and drove to his office. Standing in that elevator, rising toward Derek's floor with divorce papers in my hand, I felt like I was ascending toward freedom. The woman who entered that building was still Derek's wife, still bound by years of conditioning and control. The woman who would leave was Sarah Mitchell, independent and strong, and finally free. delivering those papers to Derek, watching, his face crumble as he realized I'd outsmarted him, that I'd been planning this for months while he remained oblivious, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. For the first time in years, I held all the power in our relationship. I had information he didn't have, resources he couldn't access, plans he couldn't control. The legal battle that followed was brutal, exactly as Jennifer had predicted. Derek hired expensive attorneys and fought every aspect of the divorce with vicious determination. He tried to have me declared mentally unstable, claimed I'd stolen money from our joint accounts, spread rumors about my supposed infidelity with various men, including Dr. Martinez and my old boss, Mr. Peterson. But I was ready for all of it. I had documentation of his abuse, recordings of his threats, witness statements from people who'd seen his controlling behavior. Most importantly, I had the strength that came from finally understanding my own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it again. The divorce took 8 months to finalize, 8 months of legal maneuvering and character assassination attempts. Derek alternated between rage and manipulation, sometimes screaming at me in court hallways, sometimes calling me in tears, begging me to come home. He tried everything he could think of to regain control, but I'd learned too much about his tactics to fall for them again. When the judge finally signed our divorce decree, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in a decade. I was free. Legally, financially, emotionally free. Derek no longer had any claim on my time, my thoughts, my choices, or my future. 6 months later, I was thriving in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My graphic design business was growing, rapidly, fueled by my renewed creativity and confidence. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I'd started dating again, carefully and on my own terms, learning to trust my instincts about people's character and intentions. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered Sarah Mitchell. She was older and wiser than the woman Derek had first met, more cautious but also stronger. She knew her own worth now, knew what she would and wouldn't accept in relationships. She'd survived, something that could have destroyed her, and emerged more authentically herself than ever before. The apartment I'd chosen for my new life was nothing like Derek's elegant condo. It was smaller, quirkier, filled with colors and textures that made me happy rather than ones that impressed visitors. I'd furnished it entirely with pieces I loved, decorated it with art that spoke to me, filled it with books I actually wanted to read and music I actually enjoyed hearing. Looking around that space, I sometimes marveled at how different my life had become. The woman who lived here made her own decisions, managed her own finances, chose her own friends and activities. She didn't ask permission to buy groceries or apologize for breathing too loudly. She didn't owe anyone explanations for her choices or debts for her mistakes. She was exactly who I'd always been underneath, just waiting for the chance to emerge again. The process of leaving Derek had taught me that escape from abuse isn't just about physical departure. It's about reclaiming your sense of self, rebuilding your confidence, learning to trust your own perceptions again. It's about understanding that you deserve love and respect, not control and manipulation disguised as care. Most importantly, it's about recognizing that you have the strength to save yourself, even when you've been convinced you're helpless and dependent. The woman who served Derek with divorce papers in his office that day wasn't a different person from the one who'd been cowering in fear just months before. She was the same person who'd finally remembered her own power. Derek had been wrong about many things, but he'd been especially wrong about my ability to survive without him. I hadn't just survived, I'd flourished. And every day of my new life was proof that his version of love had never been love at all, just control wearing an attractive mask. I was finally free, and I was never going back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. Out!